Brown.
Here.
Supervisor McCowan.
Here.
Supervisor Jurdy.
Here.
Chair Hamburg is absent by prearrangement. Chair Krosky.
Here. Thank you. I'd like to invite Mike Oliphant to lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now we'll move on to public expression. This is for items that are not on the agenda today. Okay, so if I call you and these are for actually items on the agenda because they're not marked if they are or are not, please just let me know. Paul Hansberry?
Good morning, Paul Hansberry. A couple of things. I would like to implore the board to revisit the transferability as a future agenda item with a full board. A very prominent member of the community came up to me after the last meeting and made a very interesting suggestion. He said, Paul, why don't you suggest that they have a transfer fee that would be put into escrow, which would do a couple of things. It would help the county make money, and it would also help to preserve the equity that was built into the operation by the operator should he have to sell his property for one reason or another. Maybe he ran out of money because it was too expensive, he can't afford it or whatever. But they would maintain their phase one rights. Secondly, I want to talk about nickel and diming of some things. I'm talking about the building department. I applied for 3 separate ag-exempt cargo containers permits and told them that I wanted to pay for it in advance, so I did. And they said there might be a couple little minor things, little taxes, a couple dollars here, a couple dollars there. But a few months later, I got a call saying the permits were ready, and I owed an additional $650, $620, something like that. So I looked at it, at the 3 of them, and for some reason, they, instead of using the flat fee for the cargo containers, they used an evaluation. I'm sure there's some irrefutable reason for them to do that, but that cost an additional $80 per average per permit. And then on all 3 of them, there was a $135 health department review fee for a cargo container. And I don't understand, so I asked the building department, they said, oh, that's the health department. I asked the health department, they said, oh no, the Board of Supervisors told us that we had to do that, so you have to ask them. So I'm asking you, what does the health department review fee of $135 for each for 3 shipping containers have to do with the health department? And why is that? Why are those fees put on something that's ag exempt? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jude Tillman?
Good morning, everyone. Jude Tillman, Fort Bragg. I am just want to express during public expression a desire to have the funds that I paid into the county's track and trace system returned. The track and trace system that was developed by the county was, in many of people's opinions, redundant to begin with because the state track and trace system was going to be the dominant one, and why spend money doing it twice? But in fact, it's proven to be a sort of a waste of county taxpayer dollars, and it's being dropped, and the state system will be the one that is running the control and tracking and tracing of all products in the custody chain, as we know. So many people, many businesses I've become aware of did not even participate in the county track and trace training program or obtain or attempt to participate in any way, shape, or form. So Dragonfly, being the good little doobies that we are, always pay all our taxes and do everything we're supposed to do and cross all our T's and dot all our I's. We paid all the money, and I would like to have it back. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Susan Tibbin?
Good morning. Good morning. Is this reading? Yeah. Okay. Susan Tibbin. The county really is at a precipice right now. We can be more inclusionary with a steady revenue stream to the county by incentivizing adoption, or we can go with the status quo, which many people are very afraid of, understandably. So the question is, does the status quo of fines, citations, arrests, and asset forfeiture outweigh the costs of law enforcement, judicial process, and incarceration? And after speaking with numerous stakeholders, we would suggest that Phase 1 legacy farmers' rights be preserved in a fair transfer process as per the CEQA document. Sellers would not be subject to extinguishing costs and labor-intensive infrastructure. Inheritors and/or buyers would be subject to background check, of course, but they would not be singled out for punitive exclusion. Transferability with infrastructure is available to all other businesses, including those enterprises that include controlled substances, such as liquor or brewery equipment. Extinguishment of all infrastructure is a very, very serious potential cause of unwarranted environmental damage, landfill overload, and is just unjustifiably punitive. So I would respectfully but adamantly request that the board look at this very, very closely, particularly as we move into the future and new generations of people coming up wanting to take advantage of what their forebears have put in place and facing no options without transferability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tikla Bros? David King? Oh, sorry.
Yes, my name is Tekla Bros. I'm from Covelo. I just have 3 things to talk about. First one is the 600-foot exclusion for schools in the overlay area of Covelo Core. I've spoken with many people there, and the 1,000-foot exclusion pretty much wipes out the overlay. So there's really not much point to do the overlay if you do not include also the 600-foot exclusion. And I know that it was spoken about that special administrative permits would cover that. But Covelo is a very poor town. We're very economically strapped. Most people in town do not have a lot of money. And we feel that it's an undue burden to require fees and extra effort to do something that the rest of the state has already adopted as a 600-foot exclusion. My second point is that I would like to reiterate my opposition to any kind of genetically modified product being raised in Covelo, as has been proposed by a company trying to come in. And my third point is that I would like to implore the board to wait to vote on these regulations, the full package, until after we have a fully elected board present to vote on it. Because Covelo, I've spoken to many people, we do not feel we have been adequately represented, that our interests have not been given proper consideration. And so we would really like to wait until we have our elected representative on the board, which we have really not had for quite some time. Thank you.
David King?
Good morning. I'm David King. I'm here to also speak about the genetically engineered products. I'm not against Cordova Canna or any corporation coming into Mendocino. I actually think we could really use the money. We could use the help. I think that in Mendocino we have quality and we have a heritage, which is brand, and we don't want to jeopardize our brand. The large corporations like Canna Corporation very large multi-billion-dollar companies, not just shell corporations overfunded in Canada, will not touch genetically engineered products. It's too much of a risk. And I also don't want it in my food system. I don't want it in our livestock. I think it's a real issue. So I'm definitely against that. I sent you guys a long comment in regards to forest land. I feel that the forest land owners are being a bit marginalized. That's too long of a thing to speak about. That's why I sent you that. The only other thing I want to say is we're putting all in here. I'm selling everything I own, my home, everything to do this. I want to thank you guys. Okay, you guys are the only county that has shown integrity when you didn't legally have to. We were in a temporary situation. You guys were not accountable. I know a lot of people in other counties that are all in. Their counties are telling them this is okay, this is okay. Their counties are not even reading the regulations, okay? They're losing everything because of those mistakes. You guys showed integrity when you had no accountability. That has made it so that I could risk everything I've got to go in this because of what you've done. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Anne Catherine de la Quadra.
Good morning. I'm asking for the return of my horses.
Can you state your name for the record, please? And you can pull that mic down.
Huh?
You can pull the mic down.
My name is Anne Catherine de la Quadra, and I'm requesting the return of my horses. I'm their breeder. I bred them for a state stud. Now in my father's homeland and not here because of the amount of harassment and crime that we endured from a mob that was raised by my ex-horse doctor's office secretary. And I am asking that there's no castration, there's no sale, there's no unjust enrichment of others, that I'm able to go care for my horses and bring my own veterinarian, and that no one associated with Ronnie McFadden or Dr. Michael Witt is allowed access to my horses, and that they be maintained without injury until my shipper can come get them. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's all the public speaker cards that I do have. Are there any other speakers? Come forward.
Corinne Powell from Ukiah. I know I'm a familiar face here, but I want to echo the issue of this board as currently seated and postponing important decisions until there is a full board. When the woman from the Covelo area commented that she did not feel represented, I am a resident from District 5, and I have felt incredibly unrepresented during this whole process. As you know, we had 3 board members making decisions on the original drafts of ordinances. At some point, my supervisor recused himself, and now after recusals were rescinded, he is no longer here and representing me. So please, don't do anything that would be irresponsible without representation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 5A, discussion and possible action regarding informational update on the implementation of the Mendocino County Cannabis Program and cannabis compliance efforts. And the executive office is the sponsor for this one.
Sigrid Akett, Deputy CEO, Executive Office. Today I have the whole cannabis team here. Based on the direction from last meeting, there was a desire for the board to hear an update on the local authorization process and how that interplays with upcoming state deadlines. And there was some questions around people coming in and kind of where we are we backlogged with anything in terms of the last minute rush we're experiencing. And so we're gonna start with the agricultural department, and they're gonna give an update on their local authorizations and the state deadline. Then we'll move to the treasurer tax collector to give an update. We also have the building department and the planning department to provide information on those ends of the facilities ordinance. And then once we complete that, we also have the treasurer tax collector here to give an update on the California Cannabis Authority, since she represents us on that board. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Siobhan Holmes with the Ag Department.
Thank you.
Good morning, Siobhan Holmes, Department of Agriculture. So as of today, we have received a total, we've cleared 106 temporary state licenses in December alone. Overnight last night, the cannabis unit received an additional 130 inquiries from the California Department of Food and Agriculture. So at current, we have 230 pending local authorization inquiries for state annual licenses. For each inquiry, essentially the Department of Food and Agriculture wants to double check, is the location correct? Do we have the correct applicant? And are the assessor parcel numbers consistent? So every single entry or inquiry by statute also requires a response, even if it's duplicative. Meaning if someone applies for a state temporary license 4 or 5 times, the cannabis unit has to reply 4 or 5 times. So, and that's required by statute. So it does take quite a bit of time. Over the weekend, the unit cleared an additional 66 applications for annual state, and that took approximately 3.5 hours. The press release that the Department of Food and Agriculture sent out on October 25th, letting cultivators know that if they essentially wanted to be issued their temporary state licenses in 2018, they need to have all of their documents submitted by December 1st, did create a bit of a wave. In November alone, the Department of Agriculture received 105 applications for cannabis cultivation. So with that, there's quite a bit. We anticipate approximately 400 to 450 additional inquiries from the state before the end of the month. And we are making sure that we respond to each of those inquiries individually as required by state statute. So they're coming in and we're sending them out as quickly as possible. If anyone has any questions specifically about cultivation authorizations?
Supervisor Jordy.
So, Siobhan, to just elaborate a little bit, so are some of these instances where someone is applying directly from the state and not from the county, or they're just confirming that they have approval from the county?
They're confirming that they have approval for the county. In order for a cultivator to even apply for a temporary state license, they have to show local credentials. So
Okay.
these are all people who are in our queue, yes.
So I would just try to track the numbers here. If you said 230 are pending authorization from the state right now, and that you're anticipating anywhere from 400 to 450 additional, we don't have that many approved permits. So are these are people who've either been approved by the county or are in the review process?
They're in the review process. So by submission of your application to the Mendocino County Department of Agriculture, you are eligible for a temporary state license.
Okay. So upwards of 480 people who've either been approved by the county or in the process of being reviewed by the county could potentially be approved through the state temporary authorization process.
Correct.
Okay. Or I should say 680.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
That's a big stretch.
It is.
Sherry Shatmeyer, Treasurer Tax Collector, Chair Krosky, members of the board, good morning. So I'm not sure what information the board's actually heard on the actual facility licenses, if you've actually heard the numbers, or if you're even interested in knowing how it's broke down as far as what we've issued and how that breaks down as far as what's manufacturing, what's processing. Is that something that the board would like to hear?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. I'm not sure what planning's, and I'm sorry, I've been a little distracted with property taxes. So, okay, so as of the end of last week, we have issued 70 Mendocino County cannabis facility business licenses. 13 were for full distribution, 22 self-distribution, Manufacturing level 1 is 5, micro businesses 4, processing facility 8, retailers 17, one's a non-storefront, 16 are regular dispensaries, testing lab 1. We've also issued 171 transport-only licenses, which are just so the cultivator can get their product from their farm to the distributor. So that those are not full licenses. Those do not go through the planning department for approval. Those are just issued straight through our office. So and so right now we have 50 applications that have just come in since November 1. There's now 68 that are pending the planning and building department approval. So 21 of those applications are for 2005 North State Street, which I know there was some conversation on that facility. And I don't know, Sarah may have more information on that, but that's a facility I think that's going to have a lot of cannabis businesses in it, but it's not completed and there's some issues as far as the planning and building department signing off on those. So as far as when we're working with the state, local authorizations do come straight to our office for the business licenses, and we expedite everything that we do in our office. We have one, and we have a backup that works with these and expedites every application that comes through our office. So we immediately get them to planning and building. Once there's a request to find out if there's local authorization, we immediately get back to the state. So things are moving. It feels like things are moving at our end as fast as we can get them moving. So happy to answer any questions.
Certificate Executive Office, just to add a little bit of information, unlike the California Department of Food and Ag, the Bureau doesn't have the same deadline in terms of the Ag said you have to apply by December 1st and then we'll process you. So the Bureau is going to be issuing temporaries up until the 31st, but they're also continually taking applications. And what's critical is those that are issued a temporary license in 2019 will be eligible to transition into a provisional rather than an annual. So it gives them more time to finalize some of the details they may have, and for the agricultural side, enough time for them to be issued a final permit from us. So we are working really, really hard to make sure all of the facility ones go through really, really fast. We do have a number of them that are over at the planning and building side. And if you're interested, it came up last time, we do have both our planner here and our chief building inspector and one of his building inspectors to talk to any of the questions you may have about pending licenses due to building related issues.
Okay. Any questions? Supervisor Jordy.
Maybe it's given you've already answered this, but what happens if someone's applying to the state but maybe isn't in conformance with setback issues or some planning issue? So how does that review caught? I'm assuming the county's not sending on an okay to the state if a project is not in conformance with county setback standards or other standards.
Is this in regards to cultivation or facilities?
Probably primarily cultivation. But.
So cultivation, if you're in the queue and we've issued a receipt, we sign off on the temporary license, and then you're going to move into a provisional. And then during that time, you'll work on finalizing your annual, getting your permit from us. And in that case, any issues on your property would be resolved during your permitting process with the county.
Siobhan Holmes, Department of Agriculture. To add, if you have a current setback problem and your application is pending, if you've been inspected, and the department has inspected over, I think, approximately 750 locations, more than likely you are already in the process of remedying that, because you would have also had someone visit your property from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Water Board. So the setbacks as per 10A17 and also the other state agencies, we have all been collaboratively working on making sure the final spot for the sites is compliant at all levels. So we don't have too many people where there are major issues with their setbacks. And as Sarah discussed, part of it is to demonstrate compliance. So most people are already in the process of changing that if that was an issue.
And facilities operates a little bit differently. The ordinance, we either issue you a license or we issue you a temporary license. And that's pretty much saying your building's done, you're ready to operate, you're ready to occupy the building. And so there's not that same issue. We don't do application receipts for facilities. It's either you're issued a license or you're issued a temporary license. And once that license is issued, we clear you. And any of the issues with planning and building have already been resolved.
Okay. Okay, I think we have no further questions. Are there any public comments for this item? Okay. Oh, we have Supervisor
Well, are we
McCown.
going on to the California Cannabis Authority in more detail?
I did turn in a card for this item.
Oh, we have a card too. If we want some more detail, yeah, California Cannabis Authority, we were going to have discussion on that too.
So, Ms. Schattmeyer
Sorry, go
is
right
our,
ahead.
representative,
I forgot it was
and
its
I'm
own
her
item.
alternate. So,
Sherry Schattmeyer, Treasurer Tax Collector, Chair Krosky, members of the board. So I'm not sure if the board has seen, we did have an update from Kara Martinson, who's our Executive Director on CCA, and I don't know if that was shared with the board or not. So that was a lot of information. I'm not sure exactly. I did hear that there were some questions on this, and one of the things, just so everybody's aware, which I think everybody probably is aware, is this is a joint powers authority that we do have with CSAC, and it is moving along. It's moving very quickly. There is right now we're attempting to get all the cannabis-related data sources into one platform. There's now 6. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. There's 6 counties that are now in this. One of the things that we are starting to do right now as counties is we are going to be sending out letters to all of our cannabis entities, and we're going to start telling them how this works as far as to connect the data. What's happening at CCA as far as with Kara Martinson and the rest of the team there is they are working to secure contracts with the biggest one they're trying to get is Metric with the state of California with the track and trace system, and that is something that they're working on. They are also dealing with CDFA or CDTFA, and they're going to get sales tax data. They're going to work and get everything at every level, and then every county. Right now, the county of Mendocino, we have actually had our first introductory meetings with CCA. We've had with Thomson Reuters Momentum for our tax data that we're collecting, and we've also done. They've had some meetings with our track and trace provider with SIGPA, with CalOrigin, and so what they're trying to do is get all that information and get it into one source. There is going to be connectivity that is going to be needed. What's happening now is there is requirements. Once everybody gets into Metric, which I understand right now, Metric, there maybe is one person that's starting to get into Metric, I think, at the state level. They're all going to have training. There are requirements through the Metric system for there to be connectivity in a certain manner with their information, and that same connectivity is going to be required for CCA so that we can get that data. So that's just where we're starting. Monterey County actually sent out notices a week ago, and so that's going to be an interesting conversation at our next call to find out how that went. But that's just kind of an overview. Did you have specific questions?
well, actually, the questions came from the public, and it was about the vendor and BioTrack.
Okay.
And so CCA basically is working with all vendors. That was
Correct.
just the first one that entered into an agreement to provide information. So any vendor can go to CCA CCA and do that.
Yes. So what these third-party providers are, they're equivalent to, for the entity to use, kind of like as a QuickBooks. That's, it's like something that the industry will use. So right now, part of what CCA is doing is they are entering into contracts. They have entered into their first contract with BioTrack. There's now 2 more that are on board, Grow, Flow, and Leap-Offs.
Yes.
And so those 3, but what they're going to do is enter into contracts with every third-party software vendor that is being used out there. So that there is no requirement for anybody to use BioTrack or any of these entities. There will be some who may come up with their own systems. They're going to have to connect through an application programming interface if they choose to do that on their own or through a third-party software provider. But what's going to happen is they will have to do that because they're going to have to do it for metric. So it's not something that CCA is saying you have to do this. Metric is already saying you have to do this with the CCA. So I mean, you have to, not with the CCA, but you have to do this with the track and trace.
And I think the other point that there was concern about is, and the statement needs to be made, that CCA is not a tracking system and service.
Correct.
It's basically to collect data in order to do other services.
Correct.
Chair Krosky, thank you. I just want to make one comment on this that we don't talk too much about, but the purpose of the CCA and the reason it was started was around banking for cannabis. And so, you know, honestly, they can't move forward with any type of effort with banking unless they have data. So that was the intent. That was one of the reasons why this board chose to join the CCA, and we're still hopeful that the CCA through CSAC, you know, which is a statewide organization, really will move forward with the effort of banking for the cannabis industry.
Yeah, and I further comment on that is through the working group that we had through CSAC, it became very apparent that compliance with federal banking authority had to be developed. And if you look at the financial institutes, I believe Washington, I can't think of who the other is, but for banks to come into compliance of what the federal government wants is very, very costly, which would turn around and be very, very costly to those in the industry that want to do the banking. So CCA was formed in order to get all this information that the federal government would require of any banking institute. And so anyway, it's a long process. CCA has not been able to, until it gets all this other startup done for the association, they have not been able to totally concentrate on banking, but that will be coming up. And I believe they have done some outreach with credit unions to talk to them. But until this organization, the authority, can gather data that banks are going to need in order for the federal government to allow them to take cash from cannabis industry or even checks, this all has to be done. In bank inspections, the insurance, I am aware that other banks in the past have been slapped very, very hard by the federal government in amount of cash that they do take. So this is really going to help us out as far as the banking. So you're not carrying cash all over the place, and that you're able to do transactions like any business.
Supervisor McCown?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So have we determined on the, or has CCA determined on the fee structure yet?
So, again, Sherry Schattmeyer, Treasurer Tax Collector. Right now, it is 35 basis points on the gross receipts within the jurisdiction. So that is the last that we've talked about at CCA. That is something that is an ongoing discussion. Nobody's paid any fees yet. This is going to be an expensive project. Software the software development on this is going to be extensive as far as the data that they're capturing, particularly once everybody in California is included in this. So that's what's being talked about now. The board of directors, that was, they do have the option to adjust that. I think right now we're just trying to get a feel on how that's going to work, how that's going to affect the budget, what the costs are going to be. And so, yeah, so as of right now, it is 35 basis points for, on the gross receipts within the jurisdiction.
And then it is to be determined by the local jurisdiction who would pay that. I mean, that's according to the fact sheet.
Correct. I mean, as far as that is, yeah, that's going to be the fees and whether they want to take that out of the cannabis proceeds or whatever, yeah. So. Okay.
And then, in part, I think this is also intended as a cross-referencing for compliance.
Definitely, yeah.
Which is very common. We have a public comment that no other form of business is subject to that, but in fact, I believe you commonly use multiple sources to verify the information that you receive.
Correct. Yeah, this is going to be, I take this as being similar to what happens right now. We get sales tax data. The auditor's office gets that. So we know if there's any issues there. And this is going to definitely be, first and foremost, this was, as was mentioned, this was used. It was one of the things that came out of the state treasurer's banking. He had a working group on banking, and this was one of the things that came out of it was they needed data. Because it was cash, there was no data. And that was the first and foremost. But then definitely for auditing purposes, this is going to be something that's going to help people at every level, and it's going to legitimize everything at every level as far as to make sure that everybody is in compliance, and it will definitely help regulate the market.
One concern I do have, we have 5 counties participating.
6 now.
6, okay.
Yeah, Inyo just joined.
So potentially we're funding development of a system that, is there a mechanism if other counties join later, they would be required to pay their proportionate share of the startup costs? So
that has not actually been discussed as of yet, as we've met. But what's going to happen is, depending on how much there is out there as far as gross receipts, the larger counties are going to be paying a lot more down the road than what the smaller counties will be paying. So that is not something that has been really discussed as far as what's going to happen to those startup fees. So there's a lot. I mean, we've had one since I've been on the CCA, which has been about maybe 5 or 6 months. We've had one on-site meeting, and then we've had maybe 4 or so conference calls that are an hour, and we have a lot of stuff to talk about. This is a very ambitious project. I mean, it truly is a very ambitious product, but it is moving. I mean, I think what's going to happen is too, now that the letters have gone out in Monterey County, I think that's going to tell us a lot. What's going to happen is, from what my understanding right now, is the fees, the way that they're going to be calculated by CCA is when that third-party software provider actually has connectivity to a certain cannabis industry. That's where those gross receipts will be calculated. It's not necessarily calculated off of what our gross receipts are going to be, our total. So it will take a while maybe to build up, is what we're hearing at this point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any further board comments? Any other staff items? Okay. Hannah Nelson? Okay. Casey O'Neill.
Good morning. Casey O'Neill, local farmer representing Mendocino County Growers Alliance. I'd like to take just a second to thank Supervisor Krosky, Supervisor Hamburg for their service, and the board and staff for the tremendous amount of time we've been going around on this thing for quite a while. I'd like to take a moment to examine the philosophical underpinnings of this process. As we're coming out of Prohibition, Mendocino has been very much a leader, and there is an inherent relationship between any regulated and regulated community and the regulators. And I think we need to consider that relationship and really focus on a foundation of trust. And I think that I would echo Mr. David King's comments earlier, and I would say that we are working on that very hard, but I think that there is a lot of work to do still. There are two proposals, both the CCA and the expansion for local background checks, that are a little frustrating from that perspective. And what I would note is that we're at a point in which we need to consider every dime that is spent. My business went cash flow negative twice this year, and I sort of had to make the hard decision, like, do I fire my employees and close up shop or keep plowing ahead? And we managed to pull the nose back up, and we're still flying, but every dime counts. And you know, with all due respect, given the statement that this is going to be an expensive project for the CCA process, you know, cross-checking sales tax receipts, that makes good sense. But this is a significant software movement. This is a significant amount of data. If we can't just do it through metric, I think that we should not venture down this path. And you know, given the fact that Mendocino is consistently a leader in the process, perhaps this is a time to let some other counties lead, and we could sit back and let somebody else pay for it, since you know, I think we've done a heck of a lot of paving of the way for other counties. You know, I think this is an excellent time for us to step back. You know, as a farmer, I know all too well the statement that I will reap what I sow, and I think we should really consider that right now. We have been working very hard together to build this bridge, and I think there remains tremendous potential and opportunity here, but I also think right now it's very much touch and go, and like I say, every dime counts. Thank you.
Thank you. Hannah Nelson.
Good morning. I'd also like to echo Casey's sentiments with regards to thanking you, Supervisor Krosky, for your service. I'd like to welcome Supervisor Wilson. I have a couple of questions, and I recognize that they might not get answers right away, but I just wanted to throw them out there. Last meeting, I did bring up the tax issue that will be affecting a weird category of applicants who are not going to be eligible for a state temporary license, but have to have an active application at the local level in order for them to go through the annual state licensing process, and the issue of subjecting them to the minimum cultivation tax when they cannot cultivate. So I just am requesting that that issue be brought forward at another meeting, because it is going to affect a fair number of people at this point. I'd also love to hear an update on what's going on with the CEQA stuff. I have quite a few people who their state applications are just basically being hung up for CEQA review, and everything else has been done. And then finally, there was some information that I had that the interviews were being conducted or had been conducted for a new cannabis manager, so I'd love to hear about that and if that process is going forward. Finally, with respect to the comments that Casey made with respect to the CCA, first off, I really appreciate the clarity that Supervisor Brown made comments with regards to what the intent was, and also specifically that third-party vendors are not, you know, we're not trying to charge anybody separately for that. But in the end, we know that the cost will fall down to applicants. We just do know that. And I think that Casey's statement that we really should look at each and every dime and whether or not we should take a lead, I'm torn, because I also feel like participation in regional efforts is important. But I think that the question is, what else is the information being used for? And if banking is not being prioritized, there is already database access for the sales tax information with track and separately from track and trace. There's the state track and trace. So it is appropriate to look at this. I'm not against data, and especially for useful information, for positive programs. But if it's really only about compliance at this juncture, there are other secondary sources, legitimate state sources for secondary information at this point that don't require development of a huge program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul Hansberry.
Good morning, Paul Hansberry. Again, to echo what Supervisor McCowan was talking about, that the startup costs being borne by 6 counties in the state, and to just piggyback on what Ms. Nelson just said, that we know that these fees are eventually going to come down to the applicants. And as Casey said before me, every dime counts. It talks about here not only banking, which is a good thing, and everyone knows that we need banking in the industry, but it also says the platform looks for anomalies. Where am I? Look for anomalies, individual data sources. It all looks how those sources interact with one another, giving more complete picture and a higher degree of confidence as what is being reported and what is occurring are truly one and the same. When they are not one and the same, the platform creates an alert. Well, doesn't the track and trace system do that already? I don't understand what, aside from the banking thing, which they're leading on, which I don't know how successful it will be, given the federal government and the administration these days. But I don't see the value to this, aside from the banking, but this, creating anomalies, creating algorithms to look for anomalies. The track and trace system, I think, and as Hannah Nelson already said, that there are other ways to check for taxation, et cetera. But the startup costs for 6 counties, 5, now 6, and knowing full well that this will trickle down to the applicants, it's just another, oh my God, what are we getting ourselves into? Thank you.
Thank you. Corinne Powell?
Corinne Powell from Ukiah. I am also appreciative of all the effort from this group to do what they believe is best. However, I think this is a misguided project at this juncture. The most important sentence that set me off is on the second page, the second paragraph. Member counties and participating cities must require their cannabis licensees to provide CCA with commercial cannabis data. Okay, we have no idea what's going to be required of us, but when I read this, I haven't felt quite so betrayed by this body as I feel now. It seemed like you were understanding that duplicity with the SIPCA system was redundant, was not required, and now you are committing us with no knowledge of foresight, no information about what third-party software systems will actually look like, no knowledge of these new companies entering the industry, how their systems will function, how much time is going to be involved, and of course, as many other speakers have mentioned, the cost being sent back down the line to the people who are required to participate. I'm very disappointed that our county has already spent as much time and effort as it has, and I encourage you to reconsider, as other speakers have mentioned, our participation in this CCA. Joint Power Authority just has a horrible ring after all of the requirements placed upon particularly cultivators. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia Carrera? Later? Oh, Ron's going first. Ron Edwards.
Track and trace again. This is a little frustrating. We are hearing that it's going to be helping in banking. Banking is federal. There are 35 states that have some form of legalization. And we're 6 counties that we're going to lead the way on this. I think we'd be better working with the other states. It'd be a lot cheaper to get banking as far as the regulations go. The federal government is saying that they want to know where funds come from to verify that they are not money laundered funds. That's an incredible ambitious prospect for 6 counties to take on. I appreciate the effort, but I'm not seeing how the information is going to flow. We're talking about vendors being approved for CCA, yet vendors are approved for metric. So if you look at the FAQs of metric, it says that counties and agencies will have all of that information. So I am not hearing how this additional layer is going to be utilized, how it works, how the interface works. Is this something that when you're using your management business software that it automatically uploads? And you know, these software, BioTrack is $400 a month. You can run a cannabis business with Metric and QuickBooks. QuickBooks is not an API into Metric. So I'm not hearing clearly how this works. How is this different? Where does it flow? Why is someone going to be required now to have to use a third-party software when it's not required by the state? The state is only requiring you to enter Metric, and QuickBooks is helpful in your accounting system. So I would really like to hear this clarified of how this works. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia Carrera. Oh, Supervisor Jordy.
So I'm just sitting here wondering, why are we spending an hour maybe on this one subject? Why isn't this something that staff is working out through the working groups? I mean, it just seems like we've got a tremendous number of people here from planning and building. We've got people who have perhaps almost no relationship to this topic in the room, and the taxpayers are paying for their salaries, and I just feel like this needs to be worked out. I presume everybody's in agreement. We don't want to have duplicative systems. We've said that over and over again. I think, you know, we could have a recommendation come back. We could send a letter to the organization saying we're not interested in a duplicative system. Work it out so that we're using one system that we're already paying for. You know, the board said over and over again we don't want to have 2 track and trace systems. Now that the state has selected a company, we're okay with that. We selected a company prior to the state making a selection. I just feel like we're going around in circles here, and this needs to be resolved without more board and staff time.
Chair Krosky, yeah, thank you. I'll jump in on this. I agree with Supervisor Jordy. The reason that we're even on this topic is because the board asked for an update. So, however, it is more than just a basic topic. It's somewhat controversial. So we can come back to this board after January with an agenda item. What I will also say is that we, our treasurer and the executive office staff, we are working with CSAC and the CCA, and we agree. This board had directed one track and trace system. The CCA is not a track and trace system. However, we can work with the working group, but I think that probably the best thing is that we come back after January with an item, a specific item on the CCA for this board. And I can tell you that we have direction from this board, one track and trace system. And the CCA, when we signed up, is not supposed to be a track and trace system. That system is supposed to help counties and the cannabis industry with banking, and that is why we signed up. And so, believe me, we are working with CSAC on this, and so we will come back in January. I don't know if Ms. Duquette would like to add, or our treasurer.
Sarah Duquette, Executive Office. We've had conversations, and one thing that CEO Angelo and I will be doing is working with the executive director. Our ideal situation is the CCA entering into contract with the Bureau, with the California Department of Public Health, and with the Department of Agriculture, so we will be allowed to have their data from Metric. That's going to take some time because we will have to enter into a contract with those agencies to receive that data. A lot of we're talking about of third-party vendors, you know, uploading information. That's a continual discussion. We have not full 100% said yes to that. We're working with CSAC because our ideal world is that government agency enters into a contract with those 3 other government agencies so we can get the data. It's very similar with how we treat sales tax, and we enter into a contract to make sure that our vendor that analyzes the sales tax data and help us put in information and try to get back money that we may have lost. So it's kind of similar to the structure of how we deal with sales tax and HTL. But that's our ideal situation, is we're not asking cultivators to go ahead and push another one. So I just want you to know, based on the board's direction, me and CEO Angelo are engaging with CCA and the executive director because we don't want that.
Right. And we have already told the CCA that, you know, don't ask our cultivators to push 2 buttons. So we understand what the public is saying. We understand what the direction was of this board. And so we will work through this, and we will come back the end of January with a presentation to this board.
Can I say one thing, too?
Certainly.
Sherry Shatmeyer. So definitely this CCA is definitely in its infancy stage. One of the things that I think will answer some of these questions, and I've mentioned it a couple times, is Monterey County has actually sent out letters, and there is now interaction between Kara Martinson at CCA and these, these people in the industry. And so I think that that's going to bring up a lot of concerns and a whole host of issues that have to be addressed. Thank goodness Monterey was willing to do that, because I've actually met a couple of times with the executive office and we talked about this. And yes, we have concerns about saying, okay, you have a third-party software system you have to connect with, and very confusing. It is not required, and I just want everybody to understand the third-party software system, the connection, the third-party software provider is not required. There are going to, and we're going to find out with Monterey, some have their own systems that will connect directly with what CCA needs. So I think that as CEO Angelo says, I think we'll have more information at the end of January, because I think that now that these letters have gone out in Monterey, they're the first group that's going to bring up a lot of concerns. They have all the information. They're interacting with our software provider. So,
thank you. Let's have our last public comment, and then we'll have closing board comments.
Thank you, Julia Carrera and Associates, and thank you to the CEO's office for the clarification on the banking situation and only one track and trace. The last time I was up here, I talked to you about my almost 10 years of working in the field with the cannabis permitting programs. This is the first time in those years that I have seen the economic crisis that we sit in right now. And I cannot be more adamant about economic development. You are losing cultivators either to the black market or to the living in this county. It is unaffordable to get a permit at this stage of the game. Unaffordable. People are not going to make it. I'm surprised Casey's made it as far as he has. You've got to do something. Thank you.
Thank you. But before we move on to the next topic, I was just wondering if there was staff comments on, or at least clarification on Hannah Nelson's comments regarding the overlap where they'll still have minimum taxes due and not have their state license. If I could just get a little clarification on that issue.
That's Sherry Shatmeyer, Treasurer Tax Collector. That's a discussion. Hannah did bring that forward to me a couple weeks ago, and I actually am going to meet with our Ag Commissioner, and we have some conversations that we have to take that up. We have some time on that because the true-ups, we won't be actually sending out the true-up notices till probably about March or April for the 2018 calendar year. And so that is definitely something that we're going to discuss. But yeah, as far as what all that means, I'm still not real clear on what all that, the moving parts are there, but we are going to discuss that.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Brown?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And when we're talking about future updates, the building-related issues with facilities, with planning and building service, I think we do need an update on that. And what are the issues?
Agreed. Supervisor Jordy?
There was a subject brought up a little bit earlier in the discussion, and this is not relating to CCA, about the business that sent out the press release and got media coverage for their what sounded like a very large-scale, supersized, bigger than Mendocino County would ever approve project in Covelo. And I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously the county can't stop a business from sending out a press release and saying they're going to, they're going to send a rocket to the moon. But if a company does something like that, it seems like the county might want to send out a correction that, that it's not legal to cultivate, 1 billion plants in Mendocino County under one business license. I mean, it kind of inferred that from their press comments, and it's not possible to do, I think, what they were inferring that they could do with their proposal. I mean, I think they were maybe trying to gin up investors in their business, but it also gave an incorrect impression, I think, about what's allowed in Mendocino County, and I just think the silence or the lack of response from the county isn't helpful. So I'd like to see us, not to pick on that one company, but I would like us to see us be a little more nimble when someone tries to make a splash like that for their own purposes, that the county would have a response.
Thank you. Any staff comment? Okay, further board comment? Supervisor McCown.
Well, on that last point, the company represents that they will be fully compliant with the county ordinance, and I'm not sure that they're that familiar with what the county ordinance requires and how it's structured, but I'm confident that our staff is, and any applications that they might submit will be evaluated in terms of our ordinance requirements. So, I think it's that'll all sort itself out in the course of events. Back on the issue of the California Cannabis Authority, we are here because the board requested an update on information. The board did previously authorize our participation in the California Cannabis Authority. I am a little concerned when I hear statements like this will be very expensive software and it's going to cost a lot of money to get this all implemented. So I have a lot of reservations about that. I fully support trying to position the industry so that it can move into the banking industry, but that's ultimately going to be decided more in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. than by us saying we support it. We've always supported it. If the CCA can help, that's a good thing. But again, I'm apprehensive about the potential cost. And I see that the CCA is contracted already. So we don't have a fee structure in place, but the CCA is incurring costs. So I'm kind of concerned about that also. I wouldn't like to see us get too far down the road without explicit authority from the board regarding what this is going to cost and how will it be paid for. So those are some of the questions that might be addressed when this comes back in January.
Chair Krosky, I plan to ask the chair of the CCA, Supervisor Estelle Fennell from Humboldt County, if she could be here for that presentation, along with a representative from CSAC.
Wonderful, thank you. Any further comments? Okay, thank you. We will move on to agenda item 5B, discussion and possible action, including adoption of resolution approving and adopting an addendum to the previously adopted mitigated negative declaration in compliance with California Environmental Quality Act requirements for amendments to Chapter 10A17 of the Mendocino County Code, an introduction and waive first reading of an ordinance amending Chapter 6.36 Cannabis Facilities Businesses and Chapter 10A17, Mendocino Cannabis Cultivation Ordinance. County Council and Agriculture are the sponsors.
Good morning, Supervisors. Deputy County Council Matthew Kudrowski. We're bringing back changes today that were directed by the board at its meeting on November 16th, as well as 2 items that were on a separate agenda item that day and not discussed by the board after the ad hoc discussion. A staff memorandum has been prepared that discusses the changes, and there's a red line for your review as well. I'm happy to discuss any of the changes being proposed. I'd like to mention the issues that did not get included in this ordinance due to time constraints. There's 3 primary issues that were discussed at the meeting, and I did ask the board for some amount of discretion in terms of how much time we had to bring some issues back. The first issue that staff from Planning and Building, Jesse Davis, is here to discuss in a few minutes, is the issue of view from a road. Staff from Planning and Building was still working on the options to bring back and wanted to discuss some of those issues with the board again today to clarify the direction because we're still looking at options, and this is something that's part of the CEQA document. We're not ready to present revisions for the board today. We'll come back next year. On the issue of generators, the board did provide direction on this issue, but staff needs additional time to research what we can do within the board's direction and how that would, again, work with our CEQA document. As was discussed on the 16th, the county was fairly aggressive on the topic of generators on its last ordinance, so changes to this will also require additional work on a CEQA document. We're still working on that. Lastly, were changes regarding the definitions of cultivation types. And as discussed at the meeting on November 16th, these changes to align more closely with the state on these definitions would appear to have impacts throughout the document. When we're talking about a type of cultivation, previously our current definitions are more structure-based, the state definitions are more light-based, and we need additional time to make sure we're not missing anything in those changes as those terms are used throughout the document. So for all three of these above issues, staff will work to combine these topics with changes that will also need Planning Commission review and be brought back to the board next year. The main issue that needs Planning Commission review were changes to what's allowed in industrial zoning that require zoning code changes as well. Staff has prepared a CEQA addendum for the changes being considered today. There's a resolution to adopt that addendum. And with that, I believe the district attorney will be here a little bit later this morning. Jesse Davis is from Planning and Building to discuss the issue of the view from a road a bit more with the board, and also Siobhan Holmes from the Department of Agriculture has additional comments on what we've currently proposed as the window of time and when we reopen the application window. Any questions on stuff at this point? Or, yeah, thank you.
Good morning, Supervisors. Jesse Davis, Planning and Building Services. Thank you for the opportunity to bring this item back to you for further discussion. You know, I think often we talk past one another, especially given the specificity of these regulations. And, you know, what are the regulations and what do they actually say? It's one of the questions I want to bring to you today, and really to help staff better identify the stakeholders here that this regulation or modification of this ordinance regulation would be really addressing. So with that being said, the visibility requirement in particular is for any location where the cannabis plants are visible from the public right-of-way or publicly traveled private road. And I think from a staff determination, a publicly traveled private road is one of the most difficult determinations to make, given the cross sections of road we often see throughout the county. You know, previously used logging roads, previously utilized ranching roads. Often these roads in particular have the ability to serve, or the potential to serve, 4 or more parcels. So often staff will spend a great deal of time working not only with the applicant, but also with the geography at hand to just understand what the classification of that roadway is. That being said, with this regulation in particular, there are 3 stakeholder groups that I think we're really trying to speak to. One is the general public, the other is the applicant themselves or the cultivators themselves, and the third is staff. So those 3 groups of stakeholders in particular, I think, are those that are affected by this ordinance, and solutions to this ordinance will affect each of those stakeholders independently and differently. So I think when we make a modification to this ordinance, it's important to think about how we can create a more efficient and effective ordinance, not just add another regulation to sort of better define better define the problem. With the general public, the 2 concerns that we primarily identify are both concerns around aesthetics as well as around security, both security for the parcel itself as well as adjacent parcels. Additionally, with the cultivators themselves, practicality is a real issue with regards to this ordinance in particular. The view sheds often afforded from rangeland zoned parcels are often wide panoramic, sweeping, making it often difficult to essentially conform, this particular regulation to some of the landscapes that cultivators find themselves. Also, it forces them to make temporary choices that often, given the visibility aspects, plants sometimes are only visible for certain parts of the year. So it presents a number of challenges. Additionally, the staff stakeholder group is one that I do want to present to you and talk to you more particularly about, in part because we do face a lot of difficulties, both with conveying what the fence requirements are to applicants, helping them to understand, at what points a front yard determination is necessary, as well as, again, helping them to determine when that view shed comes into effect. So from a staff perspective, this regulation is one in which, it is quite nuanced, and it does begin to take a fine eye to really review these applications. So it creates delays in our ability to effectively and efficiently process applications, because we do spend a great deal of time with cultivators talking about their location, what types of fences they need, and the like. Additionally, as applicants progress through this process, we often find that other departments, including CDFW as well as the State Water Board, may have them alter or move that garden location. Again, this brings in the fence requirements into play and often creates competing regulations that staff have to work through. So from an efficiency perspective, staff would look to or encourage the Board of Supervisors to look more cleanly at this ordinance and not apply, for example, restrictions such as by zoning, by acreage, or even potentially by roadway type, although those are avenues which we can take to further refine this ordinance. I think the more sort of nuance and refinement that we do, it's just going to take staff longer to process and work through those various applications. So with that being said, I do want to present a number of options for the board to look forward at. One would be actually no change to the ordinance at this point in time. Another would be to potentially remove it entirely, and the others would be modification. We could look at removing particularly the publicly traveled private road aspect. We could continue to look at a requirement by zoning or by acreage, but again, staff encourages you to sort of move away from that choice selection, in part because of the difficulty and the diversity of parcels and zoning types that we see across the county and we see featuring cultivators. Additionally, requirements by parcel size or potentially by cultivation type would be other options that could be afforded to us if we were looking to modify this ordinance. However, in summation, again, I encourage us to think more broadly with regards to creating a more efficient, effective ordinance with regards to this particular regulation. And that being said, I think it's important to remember that when we do modify this regulation, it affects these stakeholder groups concurrently. So just to keep that in mind. With that, I'm happy to take any questions and receive direction with regards to this issue, and then return to the items addressed by County Council. Thank you.
Comments from the board on the view aspect? Supervisor McCown?
So what would staff's preferred approach be?
At this time, we would still need to look a little bit further to see, how this would reflect our CEQA documentation, and in particular, what the most effective way forward is. Ultimately, I think the publicly traveled private road is, again, something that staff spends a lot of time making that determination. If you think about our landscape and you think about how parcels cut across, these previously utilized skid roads or these previously utilized ranch roads, it often creates situations in which that determination is very important. Again, that determination is one that I think is, burdensome from a staff review perspective. And ultimately, again, what is the problem that we're trying to solve by, having this ordinance in place with regards to visibility?
Particularly if people have been driving by that same garden for several years anyway, and they're still driving by the same garden. I imagine that's a fairly common situation.
Mm-hmm. And in some situations, it actually hinders access issues. For example, a view obscuring fence on a corner lot will sometimes actually create difficulties from a transportation perspective when someone tries to pull out and is not able to see around that corner. It's why we have setback requirements for view obscuring fences, is particularly for those instances, for it to secure safety and access to roadways.
Although that example is less likely to apply to the publicly traveled private roads, but I think I'm hearing fairly clearly we should strike out the reference to the publicly traveled private road.
I think we would need to take a further look at that, but if we were to receive direction.
Pending the CEQA analysis.
Exactly.
But also, I believe also for the CEQA analysis, there might be an advantage to retaining some limitation on visibility if we can, because the original purpose, in my view, was to help prevent neighborhood conflicts and public safety impacts. And I think there's still a validity for that in neighborhoods that have more of a residential character. And I think you're suggesting, instead of trying to approach that by zoning, a minimum parcel size would capture most of the areas that we're concerned about. Is that accurate?
It could. Again, I have a difficulty applying a regulation across the entirety of Mendocino County, just again, given the sorts of properties that we see scattered throughout. So, if we are to look at it through parcel size or road classification or road capacity, again, it creates parameters that staff have to apply when reviewing an application. And that being said, it does create additional time that we need to fully determine whether or not that site's in compliance. So the addition of a parameter such as zoning or road capacity, well, I think they are potentials that we should look into. I'm worrisome because of the fact that it adds the additional reviews necessary to ensure compliance.
Well,
thank you.
It's kind of either visible from the public road or it's not.
Right.
But again, the problem that we found, more rural areas where a road may travel a ridge top and you have long-range views downhill, there's no way to build a fence that's going to conceal the activity. So I think that's what the main thing we're trying to correct by making changes here. I don't see the difficulty really if we applied this to the residential zoning categories that are subject to the sunset. And in fact, gardens in those areas, unless they're qualify for a cannabis allowance zone, are going to be sunsetted out in a fairly short period of time anyway. So I guess I'm open to the discussion of minimum parcel size, because that would capture most of these residentially zoned parcels. So I would favor retaining the requirement for visibility from a publicly traveled private road applied to either a minimum parcel size or to the residential zoning categories that are subject to the sunset. And delete the publicly traveled private road requirement.
I'm certainly interested to hear what our other two supervisors have to say. I worry that is getting to be burdensome on the staff when we start applying a lot of those parameters. My preference would be to remove it entirely. So I'll be interested to see what the other two supervisors feel as far as view to give staff some direction moving forward.
Well, I'd like to hear some more from staff. I mean, there's areas that are not sunsetted, like the R5 5-acre minimums, and those neighborhoods may want to keep this. So I'm not sure if that what's being proposed really protects the neighborhoods that are in the R5, R10s. I mean, they may think of themselves as being just residential, not a commercial area.
Supervisor Brown?
I haven't made up my mind.
Okay.
There appears to be a lack of consensus on this issue.
I guess we'll have to bring it back again with, a couple more clear-cut options. Again, I think my preference would be that we make it as easy as possible for staff and as easy as possible for cultivators. I mean, I realize even in a neighborhood of R5 or R10, they're either going to be looking at greenery or looking at a fence. So, I don't know. Take your pick. I think we probably should really consider if we need to have this any longer in our ordinance. But we don't have consensus on it, and I guess it'll have to come back.
Yeah. Guess I might as well chime in. But I agree with you, Supervisor Krosky, that it's better just to delete it.
So we have some motion forward for bringing it back, I suppose.
Well, so I'm pondering here, because it may be that the original purposes for which we devised this requirement no longer apply. And frankly, if I'm in a semi-urbanized neighborhood, I probably want a pretty secure fence anyway. So I think it may come down to the personal responsibility of the cultivator. There is a requirement the garden be within a secure fence. Frankly, to me, secure fence means a little bit more than a strand of chicken wire or something. So, I would think it would be well, how does staff interpret secure fence?
So I would actually defer to the Department of Agriculture with regards to how they want to see that area secured. But I would posit that, given the fact that security plans are part of the state requirement to obtain a state license, as well as just the sensibility that, again, if you are going to cultivate in that location, that you'll take the precautions necessary to, secure your product and your area with regards to sort of any security concerns you may have. So that being said, we do have those areas in which we can facilitate either the security plan as well as, again, that common sense of allowing and facilitating the security of your area.
Siobhan Holmes, Department of Agriculture. Currently, applicants are also required to submit a security plan as a component of their cultivation application with the Department of Agriculture. In my experience in being in the field, property owners or renters know the property pretty well, and they tend to overestimate how secure their livelihoods are. And so I've seen some of the most protected cannabis I've ever seen before in the county, and others that simply have a fence around their entire 200-acre property and they aren't concerned. So when it comes down to what's actually happening on the ground, if there's an issue, I'm confident that between the inspectors and the management team and planning and building services, we can work with applicants in order to make sure they're compliant. But I don't necessarily feel as though people who need a fence don't have one. They're all choosing to protect their products.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So based on the discussion, I'm willing to say we can delete the requirement.
Okay. So I think we have consensus for that to come back later. What was the next
well,
item?
Well, I think it sounds to me like we have 3 that are currently in favor of deleting the requirement in a future round of amendments. Because didn't you say you
correct?
would delete
However,
it?
I think he said there had to be some secret review with that.
Correct.
So, okay. Our next item, Siobhan.
Hello, Siobhan Holmes, Department of Agriculture. First, I wanted to say thank you for giving us the opportunity to revisit the discussion that we've had about reopening Phase 1 application process in 2019. Essentially, the Cannabis Unit has learned a very valuable lesson over the past few months in watching the way in which the state sort of moved around deadlines and encouraged people to take action a little bit sooner than we had originally anticipated.
Siobhan, I'm going to interrupt for just a moment because I imagine your topic is going to spark a longer conversation. And our DA is here, so perhaps he'd like to come down and make his comments now. And that way we're not interrupted in the middle of your topic. Unless you'd like to wait, sir.
Chair, I can do whatever you'd like on that regard. I'm sorry I didn't get here at 9 o'clock. We had a sentencing in court. I'm only here because the last time we had this topic come up, I promised you I'd come back in case there were any questions. Since then, I've met with members of County Council. They've shown me their drafting of the ordinance and regarding what is out, what may, well, not what's in, but what is out. And based on my review, it seemed adequate and covered all that needed to be covered. I don't necessarily agree with everything, and it's not my position to be a King's X as far as this or that, but I had input that they were receiving and made some changes, and there was some give and take on that. So I don't know if there's any questions by any members of the board. Good morning, other members of the board. County Council, CEO Carmel Angelo.
Supervisor McCowan.
Good morning, Mr. District Attorney, and thank you for your willingness to work with County Council and the board on this issue. Comments from the public, and I'm not in a position to know how accurate they are, but they say that as written, what is in front of us now seems to provide an absolute exclusion on persons convicted of certain crimes from being able to obtain a permit. And state law appears to say that there's an opportunity for these individuals, if they've completed their sentence, including any probation, parole, other things they may have to comply with, if they've in effect discharged their debt to society, that they can then their previous conviction would not necessarily exclude them from being permitted. And I think, and I'm not sure if this is accurate, but it's also said there's an appeal process. So did any of that enter into your discussions with county council? And would you have any objection if someone has truly successfully completed all of their, probation, fines, et cetera, that they would, at that point, have an opportunity to become permitted if that's warranted to not be against the public interest?
Well, a couple things. There's about 3 I can think of. First of all, my view on a lot of this is there's a lot of folks that I've run into and not run into that have been doing marijuana in an environmentally sensitive way. They've been trying to follow the rules, whatever those rules happen to be at any moment in time, and they've been good stewards as far as trying to comply. I've always said those folks should probably be first in line because they've shown a willingness to work and do it right. The other side of that, there's been other folks that I call cheats, folks that have been have violated the law. They have not been doing things environmentally sensitive. They have snubbed their nose in some regards at the various laws that's been out there. And what seems unfair to me is that the system, at least in Mendocino, seems to be putting them on equal footing with the folks that have tried to do it right over the years. We've had folks that have come in and they've explained their situation to me after they've had the sheriff's office, whoever, show up, and they shown me documentation and the likes, and they may not have been 100% legal, but they were doggone close, and so we send them on their way and let them continue what they're up to. They didn't get prosecuted. And so I see a difference that the system right now doesn't see. When you talk about these convictions, you're also talking about probation. Well, what do you do? Some of these people go to prison, and it's not a probation matter. And so you're treating someone that's on a higher level of a crime with someone who's a lower level of the same crime, because one went to prison, one got probation. And so now you have to worry about equal protection, okay? Because if you treat one group one way and the same conviction another way, are you going to factor in how long they got prison, things like that? So that's been a concern, not so much of me, but certainly county council, and it's a legitimate concern. One of the suggestions I had, and in the wording I originally had, was that there was mandatory disqualifiers and discretionary disqualifiers. And that's, I think, what you're addressing, is the discretionary disqualifiers. Mm-hmm. And in discussions with county council, there was a problem with at least the way I was proposing the wording. And so the question was, if we took out part of that, where I had said discretionary disqualifiers, would that make it work better instead of making express that, say you have a conviction and it could be evaluated by Department of Ag and, with input from whoever's going to do it. So I think that's a question you're going to probably have to ask your county council regarding mandatory versus discretionary. So I'm late to this game. I tried to provide input early on. I'm not sure it was well received, and so I've been invited back, at least by county council and the board, to have some input at this point. But we're long down the road at this point as far as what's going on. I'm just trying to make it what I believe is best in the public safety, and the whole emphasis of whether it's the medical marijuana or the Prop 64 is to make sure people are doing it right, especially in this county as far as the environment. And that tends to be where our focus is and the likes. So what I've suggested is, I think, protects the public safety. It also protects the environment. But I see your point. I mean, I don't disagree. Except there are along that yardstick, there's different viewpoints.
Indeed. And the only absolute prohibitions, maybe I'm misreading this a bit, but looking at the state law, people who used minors in furtherance of criminal activity related to cannabis seem to be absolutely prohibited, and also if they were convicted of drug trafficking with specified enhancements, there's no opportunity for rehabilitation.
Well, that's certainly the all-in attitude of the state at times, but the state, for example, they have no way of knowing, for example, this, as you didn't, that someone's on probation with an absolute prohibition against marijuana. So they will give someone a permit, license, whatever name you want to call it, because they don't know.
And we absolutely welcome your involvement for that reason.
Yeah, but that was a welcome that was 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this has been going on since January. So this is the problem, is the state, you can look to the state, but they're not even getting it right either. And it's easy in counties like Mariposa where they say no marijuana whatsoever, zero, keep it out. That's easy. Mm-hmm. In Mendocino and Humboldt, it's a whole different thing. We convicted a man of transporting marijuana using minors to the big marijuana fest in Santa Rosa. I believe he's been licensed now in Humboldt. Now, how can that be? Okay, how can that be?
By terms of the state law, that would be an absolute prohibition.
Go figure, huh?
County Council?
Yes, while the district attorney is up here, I'd like him to discuss the law itself. In terms of the things that we're prohibiting, so that everyone understands, that we've listed 11358, 11359, and 11360 of the Health and Safety Code. So those codes have changed substantially. So if he could perhaps explain what the difference is and how these lay out now compared to the prior convictions for those offenses.
Do you have a copy of the current? If I could just look at. Thank you. If you don't mind, I'm getting old. I'm going to use some glasses here. So what you're seeing here is that under the new law, if you have a 11358, just a generic cultivation, you can have it Prop 64 down to 11358C, a misdemeanor cultivation. If you have 2 or more prior convictions, whether a felony or misdemeanor of 11358 in some subcategory, you're subject to felony prosecution still under the old law. And at some point, what my intent in looking at this was, again, we have folks that have been generally doing it wrong as far as the law. And when you have 2 prior convictions and your next one's going to get you a felony, I think those folks should get the back of the line, if not be totally prohibited, and let the other folks that are trying to do it right make their application. So that falls, 11360 is transportation of marijuana for sale. It's also now exporting it out of state for commercial purposes or importing it from out of state into California. And all things that the law, whether it's state or even the local ordinance, should agree are not good things. We don't want folks importing out of state because that implicates the federal government and other states that don't want it. Importing it from Colorado to California makes no sense because this is supposed to be something that is supposed to be for California citizens and the likes. So if you have 2 prior convictions and you do this new one, okay, you're subject to felony prosecution. Same for possession for sale. If you have 2 priors, you can be prosecuted for a 3rd for a felony. Those are the folks that we're trying to exclude out of this, which some people would call them recidivists, and I think that would be a good description. So it's not that you have 1 prior conviction and it knocks you out. No, and in fact, the prior conviction has been used by this county to prove that you have a prior claim to cultivation. So, you know, it's okay. So people are taking their conviction records, showing them the ag, saying, see, we had it on this site before, and it's okay now. All right, it's a different world than what I remember, but I am the district attorney after all. So that has to do with the 11360, 11359, and 11358. There's other ones here that have to do, again, anytime you see down here the 1602, 5650, and 5652 under sub 2 on page 2, those have to do with environmental violations of the Fish and Game Code. I don't think, you know, this is what this is about, is protecting the environment. I applaud the board for not opening up rangelands. That would have been a mistake. But we're trying to protect folks and their environment because quality of life is what this is about. And if there's one of the problems with the marijuana, it's the environmental aspects and from that standpoint, the nuisance aspects. County Council, what else would you like me to talk about on the numbers here? There's a lot of them here.
Well, I just wanted to give an explanation of why they may not look, it's not referring to the prior crimes that were felonies because many of those got reduced by state law. And the code section with regard to fish and game, those are reflective of what is shown in the state law, correct? Mr. Kudrowski, correct?
Pretty much. You know, it's, you know, Prop 64, for better or for worse, is we've accepted it and we're okay with it. I was in the newspaper just after it passed, urging people to put in their applications to have their convictions reduced pursuant to the Prop 64. Some took advantage, I mean, it was front page, right column. Some folks took advantage of that, some folks didn't. Okay, but it's not like we're hiding the ball and saying we don't want to do it. We're complying diligently with the way the law's been passed by the voters.
And if I could, the other discussion that we had was this issue of discretion. And the difference between Mr. Eister and our persons that are giving these applications, approving these applications, is that Mr. Eister, as the district attorney, has prosecutorial immunity. That's something that allows him to exercise discretion. However, he's not the one making the decision on these applications. That would be the agricultural department. So, and if you want further discussion on this, Mr. Kudrowski could do that. But we can't, the way this is set up, we can't allow for discretion on these kinds of things. So we tried to set a bar, a specific bar, to put people on notice.
I guess the way I would say that is I make a lot of decisions every day that exercise discretion. I wouldn't make a lot of those decisions if I didn't have prosecutorial immunity. So I think what County Council is saying is that without that at the Department of Agriculture, she's trying to protect the county from lawsuits for folks that think they've been denied something. And so it's going versus discretionary, trying to get to absolutes.
Supervisor Jordy.
So part of this is facilities and businesses. So if someone, let's say, had a dispensary or a retail outlet and had some sort of criminal activity, would they, under our ordinance, why wouldn't they just be prohibited from having that license?
They could be. Whether under your ordinance or under the state law, people that violate the state law subsequent to getting a permit license, you know, county, state, can have that revoked for criminal conduct. So one of the sections down here, I see down in section 4 on page 2, the 11366 code section is one of those that Prop 64 left alone. It's considered serious. It's maintaining a place for the unlawful use of controlled substances. And so we have folks here, by the way, that, you know, when we talk marijuana, marijuana does not live in the world by itself. I prosecuted folks that were basically running illegal pharmacies where they had heroin, methamphetamine, marijuana, and then they had their oxycodones for the folks that wanted to pill pop. And so you get some of these convictions for other criminal conduct that doesn't involve marijuana, but it equally applies. And I don't think anyone here wants folks opening up drug centers that's illegal, that for people to use whether it be marijuana or anything else. And if that was to happen, we would certainly prosecute them, and we would expect that the county and the state would revoke any permit or licensing that was issued. Now, I can say that to the county. The state is a whole different thing. I'm not sure they're interested in revoking anything because they're still trying to get the benefit of the tax revenue that they predicted would be there. And if you start revoking things, that cuts against what your game plan is.
Okay. Any Supervisor McCowan?
Well, I'm not going to seek to delay anything today because I think the overall package is very beneficial and I want to move forward with it. But the state law sections that are provided as an attachment, and this is section 26057, denial of application, effective January 1st, 2019, then goes on to list numerous things. Section A, felony convictions as specified. B, serious felony. First was violent felony. B was serious felony convictions. C, a felony conviction involving fraud, deceit, or embezzlement. Then D, felony conviction to employ minors in a whole raft of crimes. E, felony conviction for drug trafficking with enhancements. And then it says, except as provided in subparagraphs D and E, where the sentence, including any term of probation, incarceration, or supervised release is completed, then that crime would not be considered substantially related and shall not be the sole ground for denial of a license. So there appears to be an allowance for discretion, notwithstanding some of the comments. So that's something I think could be revisited, and perhaps that whole issue could be referred to the working groups for they and staff to further explore. How do we make sure we're synchronizing the concerns of the district attorney with the requirements of state law? Because I agree, state law appears to have some glaring loopholes that aren't accounted for that your language does address. So I appreciate the effort, and again, I'm personally ready to move forward today unless someone comes up with a great reason why we shouldn't. But I think as this entire process has shown, it tends to be a work in progress.
If I may, Supervisor McCowan, I think you're right. I don't believe the intent of the law, though, was that the County of Mendocino and the State of California be 100% synchronized, because they wanted to have different interests covered all over. If that was the case, you would not have a local permit process because the state would just take care of it. So there was never intent to basically put them hand in glove together. And there were going to be differences in Humboldt, Trinity, Mendocino, Mariposa, wherever, as far as there's glaring differences with Sonoma County. So I agree with you, but I think being different is not a bad thing.
Agreed.
Can I return this to County Council?
Thank you very much. And with that, we will take a break until 11 o'clock, and then we'll come back for more from staff. Thank you. 02. All right, Siobhan, we are back to you.
Thank you, Siobhan Holmes, Department of Agriculture. So as I was saying before, the Department of Agriculture has learned a very valuable lesson in the way in which we try to synchronize our process with additional state agencies and the California Department of Food and Agriculture. One of the lessons that we've learned, especially in watching the reaction to the press release from CDFA on October 25th, is that their deadlines really do drive the flow of applications and traffic into the Department of Agriculture. I am essentially asking the Board of Supervisors if we, the Department of Agriculture, and the entire cannabis unit could instead reopen our application process at the beginning of April of 2019. And there are a few very specific reasons why we're making this request. Number one, our ultimate responsibility and priority right now is to complete the review of all of the applications that were submitted in 2017. In addition to that, we would like to move forward with processing proposed denial applications and seek more information from applicants who are very, very close to issuance. Additionally, we know for a fact that the last state temporary license will expire March 31st. By reopening at the beginning of April, it is one less condition that staff has to double check in order to accept the application. I'd also like to give you a little bit more information on our renewal process and what the unit has learned in changing the way in which renewal applications are submitted. We started having collaborative meetings instead of applicants seeking clearance from multiple departments. And normally when they do that, it could take a person 3 hours to actually get an application submitted. We've cleaned that up and streamlined that to approximately 45 minutes to an hour by doing collaborative interviews. And essentially, we're confident that if the board will give us that extra 2 weeks, the departments can continue to nurture the process that we already have in place and bring it over to application submittals, which will streamline the process extraordinarily. I also want to remind the board that throughout the process, since last year in April when we began, the cannabis unit has only had to focus on a couple of activities during extensions. When we reopen in 2019, it'll be more than just bringing in applications and going out to inspect them. We'll have several applications that need to be renewed. This is also the first time we will have hundreds of inquiries from the state that need to be individually responded to. This 2 weeks is vital for our success. And ultimately, this group of people who applied in 2017 and early on in 2018, we need to get them their permits. We need to do it expeditiously, but we need to be organized. And we are very close to finishing a schematic for the rest of the program. But I believe wholeheartedly that following the current state time frame will help cultivators know what to expect during the reopening period and give all of the departments enough time to complete all the processes that bringing on the overlays is going to require, all of the new administrative permits. There's a lot going on. And we believe that if we're linked with the state time frame, we'll be more successful. So essentially, my item is simple. We need 2 more weeks. And it would be hugely appreciated. Because again, the goal is to clean up the queue, issue the permits to the people who deserve them and who've been working very hard with us, remove those that don't have any viability and need to be gone, and then we will have open space to receive additional permits next year. If you have any other questions, I would love to engage with you about this because it's very, very important for all stakeholders. April 1.
To clarify, Deputy County Counsel, staff is asking right now the date in the ordinance is March 11th as the date for reopening. Staff is requesting until April 1st. That would be two weeks plus to get to after that March 31st deadline.
Thank you. Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and that was just the point I was after, so that in Section 10A17-080A1, if the board concurs, the date would be changed to April 1st, and then the closing date, instead of September 6, 2019, might be October 4th, 2019.
I would double check the calendar. I made it so that the date ended on a Friday, so yes, a similar ending date.
That'd be the last Friday of the first week in October. So, thank you.
Thank you. My only question I had was the board recently received an email from an individual who said they are no longer able to get appointments. Are all of the cannabis appointments full for the rest of the month?
Yes, all of the cannabis appointments are full, and we have a cancellation list of approximately 25 individuals. There is, however, a plan for the unit to continue accepting applications through the end of the year. There's simply no more time for appointments.
Okay, thank you very much. Sure. Okay, anything further from staff? Okay, board comments before we go to public comments?
I'd like to go.
Okay, public comments. Susan Tibbin.
Susan Tibbin. I want to make a special thank you to Siobhan for making the process just a little bit more streamlined. It makes a huge difference, particularly for us who are sort of mom and pop operations, for lack of a better word. We're really, there are only two people, sometimes even one person, so that hours spent in the process here, as much as we like visiting, really cuts into cover crops and everything that still needs to be done, getting ready for the season. Speaking of which, for the smaller entity, and we're all still out there, and we're all working hard with some state people to look at a cottage microbusiness. We're looking at between 26 and 36 separate agencies, many of whom are not really as smart as Siobhan, and they haven't streamlined at all. But we're also looking at enormous fees, sometimes topping $100,000 if we want to do complete vertical integration. So what I'd like to respectfully request is that the board look carefully at looking at renewal fees being not the same as the initial fee, because some of the inspection, some of the look-sees, some of the fixes will have already been done after that first go-round. And rather than assuming skirting or criminality, assume that we're going to be doing the same as initially or better in terms of practices, stewardship of the land, et cetera. And as Casey said so eloquently, every nickel and dime really counts for us at this point. We're not the huge entities going into Covelo, and as valuable as they may be for the county and the small communities, as Julia said, many of us are really just squeaking by. And so if we were able to look at renewal fees being lower, perhaps half of the initial fee, after we all worked out the bugs, we would very, very much appreciate that. And it also means that we could stem a little bit the terrible financial slide that we've spoken about in the future, with businesses, for instance, in Laytonville, sometimes looking at 75% reduction in their gross receipts as reflected in their state taxes and county taxes. So thank you for considering that.
Thank you. Hannah Nelson.
Good morning again. I hope in a future meeting that the tiered nurseries will come back as an issue, especially with the lower acreage. And I definitely support in the memo, item number 9, the wording as designated for track and trace in terms of instead of the specific track and trace program. But I do request a specific end date. It's getting rather confusing and rather expensive for people, and the state system is online. It's just a matter of when people's provisional licenses are issued, they have to do it. With respect to the criminal history issue, many of you know that I was a criminal defense attorney for many years, and I have a lot of experience with the way that charges are filed against somebody and the way that somebody is incentivized to plead out to things that maybe they wouldn't have the money or the effort to litigate all the way through. So I really think that we need to keep that in mind. I also think that we need to keep in mind the fact that people who do not have a prohibition, a specific prohibition on their probation or parole or whatever from doing this activity because they have an unrelated crime should not be barred from applying, and that we really need to get people into a lawful system. And if we're going to continually put up barriers, there are state systems to prevent the types of things that we want to prevent from happening in terms of people abusing the system or not being trustworthy or not being eligible. We do not have the resources locally to do the kind of thoughtful review that would result in avoiding inequities, avoiding unfair judgments, and to allow for additional information to come into the process like the state requires. You're allowed to submit all kinds of additional information during that review. You're also allowed to appeal it. That's a really, really different circumstance. Really quickly, I want to hit up a couple of other issues. And by the way, the environmental background, you know, if you didn't upsize a culvert properly, or you didn't know that you had to get an LSA to do that, you could have a violation for 1602 in the past. So I just want to kind of keep that in mind. With respect to a few other things, I echo what Susan just said about the annual or the reapplications. On section, I'm just going to use the last section numbers, 080. B6 on page 22. A non-op, I thought we had clarified, was supposed to include applicants and not just permittees. So I would request that that language be modified to specify that. On 100D1A, I just would request that we have a specific period of time to complete what period of time is the required period of time. I think that otherwise it could send mixed messages that we're encouraging people to come into compliance, but then not saying, hey, I think it's very reasonable that the Ag Department should have a specific time by which people have to provide the information. Same thing with B, within a reasonable amount of time. On D, I would just request that you clarify about compliance plans, because the way it reads, if cultivation is in an illegal or non-compliant structure, then compliance plans aren't being respected. And one last thing, and I'll get out of here, and that is that the way that the definition for processing is worded would prevent people from using drying sheds that are ag exempt. Thank you.
Scott Ward.
Good morning, Scott Ward Company. It's almost noon. I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to speak. First thing I want to say is I'd really like to thank staff, Siobhan, Jesse, Mark Kleiser, Sean Connell, for all their help with me, their patience, and their lucid explanations about the process of my questions. It's been unfailingly polite and very helpful. Fences, I just want to hopefully solidify your support of Jesse's position on private-public roads. It's a ministerial decision. It's very difficult for a staff member to make a ministerial decision when there's a cloud or a unclear definition. Fences over 7 feet tall require building permits by the building code. Generally, most building officials require engineering for fences over 7 feet tall, solid fences, because of the wind loading. To do a view obscuring fence on a cannabis operation, sometimes the plants are 8 to 10 foot tall, sometimes the greenhouses are 20 foot tall. So you're just complicating and adding another expense. Regarding the DA's comments, they're concerning to me. What I understand District Attorney Eister say was that if you had 2 misdemeanor convictions on a certain area of law, that a third one would turn you into a felony. Therefore, according to what I understood him to say was, we're going to presume that you're going to do that third violation. Therefore, you got to go to the back of the line. Where's the presumption? That makes no sense to me. What else? Environmental violations, water violations, those are all regulated by the state. I think that as much as we can defer regulatory structure to the state and quit adding another layer or a different layer or the same layer but just a little bit extra stuff, it puts a burden on the applicants, puts a burden on your cultivators. And I just think if there's any time, the opportunity we can have our regulations defer to the state regulations instead of adding to them or mimicking them, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Hansberry.
Good morning, Paul Hansberry. First of all, I just want to save some time and say that everything that the speakers have said I agree with wholeheartedly, especially when it comes to the fees for renewal. I'm sure that's something that you intend to look at after you get past the first round of applicants. Let me just say something that other people may not talk about. The visibility from a public road, I'm all in favor of striking that from the ordinance. I think, however, that the state may have a different point of view, and so in trying to untie your hands, we've actually submitted some of this language to the state, and with regards to that, we put cultivation and outdoor storage of materials, products, and vehicles shall be in a lockable space and shall not be visible by normal, unaided vision from a public space, including street and adjoining properties in the immediate surroundings. This would take care of all these pictures you see here, so as long as it's in the immediate surroundings, and that's where the limitation is, not across the valley. So thank you for all your hard work. I really do appreciate it, and have a good Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Tekla Bros.
Tekla Bros from Covelo. Once again, I'd like to reiterate the thank yous to all of you for all your work. I understand you guys are, hammering out history here. This is going to be something that we all live with, that we all are experiencing, and it's a doorway. It's a doorway, and it's taken some work to get through the doorway. But okay, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the GMO regulations, and Measure H covers but doesn't quite clarify some of the new techniques that are being used in biology. And I think that it would be a good reiteration for Measure H to be left as is, but that we take it and insert it into the CANA-regs with clarified languaging around gene editing and other accurate but not quite accurate definitions of genetically modified organisms. So I would like to see work begin on that, perhaps adapting Measure H and making it law in the CANA-regs too. Also, so in addition to that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's spoken, and I agree with everything that's been said so far. I've asked a couple of times for you to delay your vote on this very important piece of legislation that you're putting together. I feel like everything I've listened to today, there's a lot of things left to decide, and a lot of it's being pushed to next year in any case. Why not just delay the vote to wait until after all of these unanswered questions are put together? I would love to be able to discuss this with Covelo's new elected representative too. I would like to have his input. Last thing, I'd like to see you extend the deadlines for permits because of all of the unanswered questions for so many people. The overlay has just been put into effect. Many people are still very confused about it and what it will involve. And we know that there's a deadline of January 1st to get our temps in, but it's probably not happening for a lot of people. And a lot of people will be cut out if it is not extended somehow. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Ron Edwards.
Ron Edwards Willits. I would like to further what Hannah was saying about the track and trace. Is there a deadline? When is it due? The contract, what's going on with that? Is there any way that the public, because I get asked a lot of what is going on with this, if we can get some clarity on that issue. I'd also like to address the district attorney. It was very disturbing, some of the conversation. Prop 64 was about correcting some of the social, economic injustices that were done in the war on drugs. As most people know, the level of justice you get really depends on the type of lawyer you had, and those things were really part of 64, to not keep people out. And when you're keeping people out, you're keeping them out of the regulated market. We want to bring people in, we want to regulate them, and if we're just saying like, sorry, you know, you've done your time, you've done all of this, and you still can't participate, we're not encouraging them to come forward. And I think anything we do that makes it more difficult for people to get into a regulated system, because when they're regulated, we know what they're doing. When they're not regulated, we have no clue. We're keeping them in the black market. And I think that does more harm to this community than having regulated people. Last meeting, somebody was talking about they were being shot at on redwood timber property. That's not by regulated people. We still need to work that this is a regulated program. If we still run around with the prohibitions in the 2012 and what things happened before, we'll never go forward. People are prosecuted in the North Coast differently than the rest of the state when it comes to cannabis. If you were in Southern California, the chief of police did a presentation at the Cannabis Advisory Committee about how it's hard in a warehouse to bring somebody charged more than a misdemeanor with the new regulations. So they are not being prosecuted. Yet in the North Coast, we are going after people full guns with environmental issues that are, I feel, being used to compensate for the lack of money from the old program. Thank you.
Thank you. Casey O'Neill.
Casey O'Neill, local farmer, representing MCGA. I'd like to definitely second and support the previous comments and build slightly on what Ron Edwards just had to say. There's a very clear philosophical difference underlying this question of, are we trying to redress and move away from the drug war, or do we not have a problem with the drug war? And this one hits home pretty hard for me because I had a felony conviction that was reduced under Prop 64 to a misdemeanor, and I also have an old misdemeanor for possession. So therefore, I'm exactly the person that the DA is talking about, and I should now go to the back of the line because I have 2 misdemeanor convictions and I'm likely to commit a 3rd. So there's definitely some frustration there. And the further point that I think really needs to be emphasized is, just like I said, every dime counts for the cultivators, every dime counts for the county. We're not a rich county, and every time we duplicate a process and we involve staff time and we involve costs, we essentially take something and spend money on it that we could have just had the state do. So I really, really want to emphasize that I think we should just go with the state program for the live scan. And one other point on that, the state doesn't require employees who are not defined as owners. State has a very broad definition of owners, but does not require employees to do a live scan. So that further requirement here is an additional layer that is a business cost as well. Definitely very strong support for reopening the permit window. I'm talking to a lot of people who are still trying to digest the complexity of the thing. I think it's really a smart move that we do reopen the permit window. And I wanted to support also the removal of the view from public roads. You know, I'm a pretty consistent advocate for this normalization process, and I think this is an excellent step moving forward. I do think we are going to have to revisit generators again. You know, I think there's still some complexity to work out there. Perhaps that's something that could be bumped to a working group for further discussion. And definitely wanted to note Hannah's comment just to make sure that in including drying in the definition of processing, that we don't remove drying from the ability to be utilized in ag-exempt structures. That was something that we all worked very, very hard on, and from a personal perspective and from that of a lot of cultivators. Like I do not have a commercial building on my farm, and I am needing to be able to look at the ag-exempt possibility. So thank you as always for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Julia Carrera.
Thank you. Julia Carrera and Associates. I wanted to address the reopening of the applications. Ms. Holmes said that there's a waiting list. I'm second on that list. 2 of the 14 people that I have had an appointment, but one of the inspectors was sick and we weren't told that we could see someone else, so they never got their application taken. So there is a real need to still allow people, especially with this state deadline, to be able to come forward and apply, considering that there will be new options for people that couldn't qualify before. More importantly, though, is the 2-week extension that Ms. Holmes is recommending. And I completely understand from a staff perspective the need for that, the dire need for that. But from a farmer perspective, it has real financial implications and consequences that they cannot afford at this stage of the game, not one of them. And that is, in a farmer's life, and Supervisor Brown, you know this all too well, 24 hours can cost you $100,000 and 2 weeks can cost you more. People need to plant in March. They can't wait until April. They won't have a full plant harvest if they wait until April. Those 2 weeks count a lot on the financial economic realm for a small farmer. It counts a lot for staff to have those 2 weeks. So you're kind of in a conundrum here. You really are in an economic crisis with your applicants and potential applicants and permittees, and those 2 weeks are going to add to that economic crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Swami?
Good morning. I'm Swami Chaitanya. I'm president of the Mendocino Cannabis Industry Association. And I want to speak in favor of what Hannah and various other people have said. We need to really bring people into this program. With only 240 actual permitted farmers and about 700 waiting, all these prohibitions, all these things are preventing people from coming in, and you know it's an economic crisis. So I won't repeat what everyone has said. I really wish you take everyone's words to heart. There's changes that need to be made in order to bring more people into this. We need to extend the deadline because we know that this county is really in economic trouble by denying all of these farmers who are the main economic driver of the county for the last 50 years. So please, please, please help us come into the program, because even District Attorney Eister says there are good people and there are bad people. And mostly what we've seen, there's been a lot of help from staff. I really want to praise them on all levels. But there's been so many hurdles and so many impediments that people are discouraged. People are not coming in. And you really have an economic crisis which affects every family. And that's going to go in other directions. So please, whatever you can do to facilitate this process and streamline it so that we can come in and be part of this program. Many of us want to be part of it, and they're not being able to for various reasons. So with all the help you can give, it's really time to step up and bring us in here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, back to the board. Comments? Supervisor McCowan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one thing I do want to mention. It was another item that the board directed that I want to make sure we don't lose track of. At previous discussion, the board did, I believe, voice, it may have been unanimous support for a tiered system for nursery permits, and I know staff has been working on developing that. So when these further amendments come forward that we've referenced, that were referenced in County Council memo, hopefully we will be ready to move forward with the tiered nursery permit system as well once all the environmental issues are worked out as to what needs to be done for the addendum. That said, I think, you know, a number of valid points have been raised by the public, and yet to address those at this point would only further delay the process, I believe. So based on that, I'm actually ready to go forward with the recommended action this morning so that the changes that we have agreed to can be implemented and move forward, and I think they will benefit many people. Understanding further changes are still possible and will definitely be enacted going forward. So I move that we adopt the resolution approving and adopting an addendum to the previously adopted mitigated negative declaration in compliance with California Environmental Quality Act requirements for amendments to Chapter 10A17 of the Mendocino County Code, and authorize chair to sign the same, and introduce and waive first reading of an ordinance amending Chapter 6.36 Cannabis Facilities Businesses and Chapter 10A17 Mendocino Cannabis Cultivation Ordinance.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. My comment on it is, did you want to, with that motion, maintain the date that was in here, or the recommended date from
I'm
Ag?
sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. With the amendment to Section 10A17.080A1, so that it will read, and from April 1st, 2019 until Friday, October 4th, 2019. So
Okay.
replacing the existing red line.
Do we have a second for that then?
I agree to the amendment, yes.
Okay.
And then before we vote, I did want to acknowledge the work of staff, and particularly Deputy County Counsel Matt Kudrowski, who accomplished a tremendous amount of work in a short amount of time to fulfill board direction on the ordinance amendments and the addendum. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other comments? Okay. Oh, yes. Supervisor Brown.
Siobhan, I don't know if the Ag Commissioner can be brought back over. I think he had an announcement to make before we adjourn today.
Yeah, that's right. Chair Krosky, he has a training over there, so he went to see the participants, but we could get him over here. We do have one closed session item, so I don't know if you would like to go to closed session and we can have our Ag Commissioner after that, or we can call him right now, actually. Carla, if you could have them call. It should only be a couple minutes for him to walk across the parking lot.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's worth noting that they are doing a pesticide training, which is where he went, and they do have over 50 people over there currently being trained. So always good news that they're so well attended. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Please vote by the button.
Motion carries with Supervisor Hamburg absent by prearrangement.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, staff. Supervisor Brown.
Thank you. And one item we talked about, and actually it came up general government yesterday with Supervisor Judy and myself, but I think it's talking about the GMO ordinance. And I'd just like our county council to update the board as to where that's at.
So we had, this is Catherine Elliott, County Council. We had seen some of the questions and conversations with regard to the our GMO ordinance and the cannabis ordinance. So we are pulling our past County Council opinions and looking at this issue in terms of how everything lines up, and we'll plan to get back to this board on that issue. So. We were, as noted, busy trying to get this to the board at this time, and do appreciate the note of thanks to Mr. Kudrowski. So,
yes, and I just wanted to make sure that that was covered because it came up again here today.
Thank you. Is he on his way, or do you want to do it after? He's on his way. Okay. Supervisor McCowan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have one item under Board of Supervisors and miscellaneous, if I may. It's, pardon? So we don't currently have a solid waste director. There are some relevant.
We don't have that on our agenda.
We have Board of Supervisors and miscellaneous.
No, we don't.
We didn't, Carla, we didn't put it on.
It's on my agenda.
Look
It's
at the.
not on the chair script, it's on the published agenda. It's on the published agenda. It's on the online agenda.
Under 6, Board of Supervisors and miscellaneous.
No, we do have it.
So it is here.
It's just a simple matter for board direction. We don't
Thank you.
currently have a solid waste director. There are solid waste issues currently in play relating to contract compliance and also relating to a request from City of Ukiah for a site use agreement regarding the Ukiah transfer station. I would respectfully request that the board authorize the county executive officer in the absence of a solid waste director to pursue these issues in cooperation with the supervisors who are most directly affected.
Supervisor Brown?
Thank you, and I can agree with that. And I was smiling at the CEO. We put a lot on her plate constantly. So, but there's also rulemaking for organic waste that rural counties are going to have a really hard time addressing. So when we talk about solid waste issues and MSWA, you know, we need to keep up with that regulation. And I wanted to bring that up. I was at the Rural Counties Association meeting last week, and no place for, you know, supervisors' reports. But certainly that is a very important issue that we need to stay connected with.
Supervisor Jordy, any comments before we move back to?
No, just I think that makes sense, and that that I'm hoping at maybe sometime next year we also have a discussion about a more robust code enforcement and cleanup process for dumping sites. I'm getting an increasing number of complaints from people. Neighborhoods are getting dumping in their neighborhood, and I think we need to revamp the strategy that we've got in place, which doesn't seem to be quite enough.
And
Supervisor Brown?
Well,
I was going to say, and yes, I inquired with Supervisor McCowan about a place where lots of trash was dumped, and it was a homeless site that the neighborhood was complaining about. Thank him for taking care of that. But yeah, seeing a lot of that as well. And that's part of the problems they're having at Lake Mendocino. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the directive? I didn't capture that.
We don't have a directive yet.
Okay, thank you.
Comment, Supervisor McCowan.
well, I thought I interpreted Supervisor Jordy's comments to mean that he had no objection to the direction to the CEO. But also on the illegal dumping, I agree, unfortunately, we haven't had the attention to that as we did under a previous MSWA director, but the best I would offer for now is to call MSWA and report them. They do attempt to get out there and clean up illegal dump sites, both in the unincorporated area and within the cities. So please call MSWA, or if it's in the Ukiah Valley, some people call me.
Like Terry Brown.
Harinder's back, isn't he?
All right, never mind. Did you want to repeat the?
The directive is to authorize the CEO to work with interested parties regarding contract compliance issues and a potential site use agreement for the Ukiah transfer.
I don't believe our deputy clerk of the board can type that quickly. You're welcome.
So I believe the preferred direction, if there's no objection, would be to authorize the CEO to, what did I say?
I have
to work
general
with
consensus of the board
parties.
that CEO is authorized to work with authorized parties.
to work with interested parties regarding solid waste, contract, compliance issues, and a potential site use agreement for the Ukiah transfer station, and to work with those supervisors most affected.
Sounds great. Okay, thank you. And with that, we will bring our Agriculture Commissioner up.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, CEO Angelo, County Council Elliott, and announcement. I am so pleased to announce that Mendocino County Cannabis Program, we hired a new cannabis program manager. He is here. His name is Sean Connell. He works for Mendocino County Planning and Building Department. He is involved in cannabis for last year and a half. So after a long process, hiring process, it's always take time. Many applicants applied, and after going through a thorough hiring process, the job was offered to Sean Connell, and I am so excited. I am so thankful he accepted the offer. Thank you. And his first day with Department of Ag will be December 31st. I spoke with Sean, and he's excited to make this program one of the shining examples of success. He is so committed. We have long discussions about this program, so I am so excited. I know for sure that Sean will be a good asset, and the leader we were looking for cannabis program, I am sure we got that leader. So Sean is here. Sean, if you would like to come and say a few words.
Welcome.
Madam Chairperson, thank you. Dr. Harnder, thank you to the people in attendance today and to county staff. Thank you for your help. I do want to say a special thank you to Mike Oliphant. I'm almost 100% sure that he is locked up in business at this moment. Without his guidance through this year and a half of doing this, I don't think we'd be where we are. I am extremely excited. I'm trying to contain that excitement, as you can hear the wavering in my voice. Clearly, there is a lot of work to do next year, and I look forward to work with Dr. Harnder to achieve success at Board Direction. Thank you very much for the appointment, and I look forward to fulfilling this role. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Okay, staff, thank you so much. We really appreciate all the hard work on this. I know that often the public thinks it's not enough changes, but it is definitely positive changes and big changes and more big ones to come. So thank you for the work. All right, and with that, we will adjourn to closed session. Item 9A, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation 1 case. Okay, and we'll reconvene at 12:02 from closed session, and item 9A, direction was given to staff. And with that, we will adjourn at 12:03.